Welcome back to my YouTube family. I want to tell you about a woman named Sandra. She is 57 years old. She has worked in hospital administration for 31 years. She is good at her job. She has a pension, a 401k, and another 8 years before she plans to retire. Last year, Sandra did something that none of her colleagues expected. She walked into her director's office and asked for 6 months off. No medical reason, no family emergency. She simply told her director, "I need to stop. Not forever, just for now." Her director said yes. For 6 months, Sandra did not work. She visited her daughter in Colorado. She took a ceramics class she had been thinking about for a decade. She read books she had been saving since 2018. She slept 8 hours a night for the first time since her 30s. She came back to the hospital, and by every measure she and her employer could identify, she was better at her job than she had ever been. Sandra did not know it had a name at the time, but what she did has become one of the most talked about workplace trends of the last 2 years. It's called a micro-retirement, and almost every piece of content covering it has been written for Gen Z and millennials. The term was popularized by Timothy Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, more than 15 years ago, but it has exploded in the last 18 months as a Gen Z concept. 401k Specialist Mag. Today, I am going to make the case that micro-retirement was never really a Gen Z idea. It is a human idea. And for people aged 55 and older, for people who have been working for 30, 35, 40 years, it may be the most important retirement conversation you have not been having. Stay with me, because near the end of this video, I am going to show you the exact financial framework for how to take a 6-month break without destroying your retirement plan. That part is the piece that makes everything else actually possible. Quick note, if Wealth Logic helps you, subscribe and hit the bell. I cover retirement from every angle, the financial and the human, because one without the other gives you an incomplete picture. Now, let's get into micro-retirement. What micro-retirement actually is. Let me define the term precisely because it is being used loosely in a lot of places, and the distinction matters. Micro-retirement is about taking short, regular breaks from work, typically lasting a few weeks to a few months, usually to travel, work on a personal project, or relax, with a plan to return to work afterward. It is a new spin on the traditional sabbatical. However, there are key differences. First, micro-retirement is not employer-funded. You are funding it yourself from savings or other income. Second, unlike a sabbatical, you do not have a guaranteed job upon your return, 401k Specialist Mag. That second difference is important. A sabbatical is an agreement with your employer. A micro-retirement is an agreement with yourself. It is self-elected, self-funded, and, by definition, an act of choosing your own life over your organization's calendar. 13% of millennials and nearly 1 in 10 Gen Zers are planning a micro-retirement in 2025, according to a survey from workplace insights platform sidehustles.com. And those numbers have been climbing every year since 2022. CBS News. But here's the number from that same research landscape that almost nobody is talking about. Among all employees surveyed across all generations, 59% said they would consider a micro-retirement in the future. And 75% said they wanted their organizations to invest in formal policies around these breaks. NPR. 59% across all generations. That includes people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. That includes people who have spent decades building careers, raising children, paying mortgages, and who have never once taken more than 2 weeks off at a time. And yet, the entire national conversation about micro-retirement has been framed as a Gen Z story. Articles about burnout in 25-year-olds, TikTok videos about people quitting their tech jobs to travel Southeast Asia for 3 months. What about the 58-year-old who has been running a department for 15 years and has not taken more than 5 consecutive days off since her youngest child was born? What about the 60-year-old who spent 4 decades building something and now feels the weight of those decades in a way that a 2-week vacation cannot touch? Where is the micro-retirement conversation for them? Here's the thing Gen Z got right, and the thing that makes micro-retirement actually more relevant for older workers than younger ones. According to Gallup data, employee engagement in the U.S. has sunk to a 10-year low, with only 31% of employees engaged. Among workers under 35, the decline is sharpest and marked by lack of role clarity, developmental stagnation, and disconnection from purpose, CBS News. Gen Z saw this data, or more precisely, they felt it, and they did something about it. They took breaks. They called it micro-retirement. They put it on TikTok and Instagram, and the narrative became, this is a young person's response to a broken workplace. But that Gallup number, 31% engagement, is not a Gen Z number. It is a workforce-wide number, and the workers who have been disengaged the longest are not 23-year-olds. They are the people who have been giving 30 and 40 years to organizations that have restructured around them, automated beneath them, and in some cases made them feel invisible in the final chapters of their careers. The rate of Americans older than 65 still working has almost doubled since 35 years ago, per data from Pew Research Center. And as Fortune reported, working one's entire life seems to have made a mark on older generations' psyche. Retirement to me is a scary thing. How much can you lay on the beach? Said George Cavadon, 73. Read that quote again. Retirement to me is a scary thing. How much can you lay on the beach? That is not a retirement problem. That is an identity problem. And a micro-retirement is one of the few tools that actually addresses it before it becomes the permanent version. Here is why. If you retire at 65 or 67, having never taken an extended break from work, you go from full employment to full stop, from structure to no structure, from purpose to open calendar, from a role to nothing, all at once, in one day. Stressed out Gen Zers and millennials looking at unretiring baby boomers and Gen Xers struggling to actually retire are finding that it might be time to reinvent the wheel, taking what Fortune described as little water breaks or vacations along the way, rather than sprinting to a single finish line. The conversation. What if you did not wait for 65 to find out what rest actually feels like? What if you took a 6-month break at 58 while you still have the health, the energy, and enough time to actually learn from what the break teaches you, and came back to your final working years with more clarity about what those years should be for? That is the micro-retirement case for boomers, not as a substitute for retirement, as a preparation for it. This was actually a boomer idea all along. Here's the thing I want to name directly, because I think it matters. Micro-retirement is not a Gen Z invention. It is a human need that Gen Z gave a name to, and the evidence that older workers have always needed this is hiding in plain sight. Academia has been taking sabbaticals or leaves for decades to study, to research, to restore perspective. The idea that professionals need extended breaks from sustained high-performance work is not new. What is new is that Gen Z is doing it outside of academia, without institutional permission, and calling it something that sounds like retirement, which makes older generations either dismissive or envious. 401k specialist. The dismissive response is understandable. The boomer generation was shaped by a specific work ethic. You showed up, you stayed, you earned your break at the end. Taking a break in the middle was for many an indication of weakness, instability, or ingratitude. The envious response is more interesting, because underneath that envy is something real. The 55-year-old who hears about a 30-year-old taking 6 months off to travel Portugal and feels a pang of something is not feeling envy of youth. They're feeling the weight of all the breaks they didn't take, all the vacations they cut short, all the Sunday afternoons they spent at their desk. A 2025 HSBC study across 12 markets found that in the U.S., 37% of respondents plan to take a mini retirement with a preferred duration of 6 to 12 months. The ideal age cited to take the first break was 46 years old. And this trend was seen across all generations, led by Gen X and millennials, but with baby boomers not far behind at an average of 2.9 planned mini retirements in their lifetime. Newsweek. Baby boomers average 2.9 planned micro-retirements in their lifetime. They are not disinterested. They are not opposed. They are simply not being given a framework that speaks to their situation, their finances, and their timeline. That is what the rest of this video is for. Stay with me, because the next two sections are the ones that make this actually actionable. First, I want to show you what a micro-retirement does to a person based on what the research shows, and then the specific financial framework for how to do this without compromising your retirement plan. What a micro-retirement actually does to you. This is not about luxury. This is not about people with money to burn taking vacations and calling it something important. The research on what extended intentional breaks do to workers is specific and consistent. Melissa Murphy-Pavone of Mindful Financial Partners says, for many, it's not about opting out of work altogether, but about opting into intentional living. Taking an extended break, whether to travel, care for family, or simply reset, can be a smart and fulfilling strategy when it's financially planned for. 401k Specialist Mag. Opting into intentional living. That phrase is worth sitting with, because the alternative, working continuously from 22 to 65 without a pause long enough to ask what the work is actually for, is deferred living. It is the assumption that the meaning is somewhere ahead, at the finish line, in the retirement that will finally give you time to figure out who you are. The problem with deferred living is that it defers indefinitely. The research on retirement identity crisis, which I covered in a recent video, shows clearly that the people who struggle most in retirement are the ones who arrive at it having never practiced being present, never practiced rest, never practiced building a day around meaning rather than productivity. A micro-retirement is not just a break from work, it is practice for the rest of your life. Here is what the people who have taken them report consistently across multiple studies and first-person accounts. First, clarity about what actually matters. When the structure of work is removed, the things that fill the space tell you what your actual priorities are. Not the ones you said mattered, the ones that showed up when nothing else was competing for attention. Second, health recovery that cannot be achieved in 2 weeks. Gen Z is using micro-retirement to avoid burnout, find greater fulfillment in their work, and enhance their overall well-being. But burnout recovery, true physiological and psychological recovery from sustained high-stress work, takes longer than a vacation. Research on burnout recovery suggests that meaningful restoration requires 3 to 6 months of reduced stress. 2 weeks in Mexico is not 3 months of genuine decompression. For workers in their 50s and 60s who have been accumulating the effects of decades of sustained high performance, the recovery needs are proportionally deeper. Third, better re-entry into work and clearer exit when the time comes. Sandra, from the beginning of this video, came back better, not just rested, better, more decisive, clearer about what was worth her attention and what was not. And she told me something else. She said that after 6 months, she knew, for the first time with certainty, when she would retire. Not because she wanted to leave, but because the break had shown her what she was working toward. The break gave her the end in focus. The financial framework. Here is what I promised at the beginning. The actual financial framework for taking a 6-month break without derailing your retirement plan. The HSBC 2025 study found that 40% of U.S. respondents intend to spend under $100,000 during their mini retirement. The top three income sources during that break are personal savings at 49%, dividends, interest, and capital gains at 41%, and part-time jobs or freelance projects at 36%. On average, U.S. respondents aim to save about $530,000 before starting a mini retirement. Newsweek. Now, that $530,000 target before a mini retirement is the number for people doing this as a full break with no income. Most people reading these numbers between 55 and 65 are not starting from zero. Let me build a framework that is specific to where you actually are. Step 1. Calculate your actual monthly cost of living, not your income, your actual spending. Housing, food, utilities, health insurance, transportation, and lifestyle. For most Americans aged 55 and 65, this number falls between $3,500 and $6,000 per month. Multiplied by 6. That is your micro-retirement fund target. $21,000 to $36,000 set aside specifically for this break. Step 2. Separate micro-retirement savings from retirement savings. This is the critical distinction. Your 401k, your IRA, your pension, do not touch these for the micro-retirement. They are for permanent retirement. Your micro-retirement fund is a separate pool, a dedicated savings account built specifically for this purpose over 12 to 24 months of deliberate monthly contributions. Step 3. Account for health insurance. Because micro-retirement is not employer-funded, you say goodbye to your paycheck while you're away, and likely your employer-sponsored health insurance as well. This is the most common financial gap people miss. Health insurance for a person aged 55 to 64 through the ACA marketplace typically ranges from $450 to $900 per month, depending on income and location. Add this to your monthly cost calculation before you finalize your target savings number. 401k Specialist, MAG. Step 4. Plan your reentry before you leave. The top 3 challenges associated with mini retirements in the U.S. are financial security concerns at 39%, family obligations and responsibilities at 34%, and anxiety about re-entering the job market at 32%. Newsweek. The re-entry anxiety is real, but it is significantly reduced by planning your return before you leave. If you are taking a negotiated leave from your current employer, have the return date agreed in writing before your first day off. If you are stepping away completely, have a professional network maintenance plan. 2 or 3 meaningful professional conversations per month during your break, so you are not starting from zero when you return. Step 5. The Social Security calculation. This is the one specific to people in the 55 to 65 window. Every year you work between now and your claiming age affects your Social Security benefit calculation. The SSA uses your 35 highest earning years to calculate your benefit. If you have fewer than 35 years of earnings, any year of zero income reduces your benefit. If you already have 35 or more high-earning years on your record, a 6-month gap year or even a full year off has zero impact on your Social Security benefit calculation. Go to ssa.gov and open your My Social Security account. Check your earnings record. If you already have 35 strong earning years, you may have more financial flexibility for a break than you realized. Equanimity Wealth's Rodriguez says, "It takes financial planning, and it's not just for trust fund kids. I've seen everyday professionals, even those on modest salaries, build up a buffer to step away with intention." 401k Specialist, MAG. Here's everything together. Micro-retirement is a self-funded, extended break from work, typically 1 to 12 months, taken with the intention of returning. 13% of millennials and nearly 1 in 10 Gen Zers are planning one in 2025. But the research shows that 59% of workers across all generations would consider one, and 75% want formal employer policies supporting these breaks. CBS News, NPR. Baby boomers average 2.9 planned mini retirements in their lifetime. They are not disinterested. They simply need a framework that speaks to their situation. Newsweek. The case for doing this before official retirement is not about luxury. It is about preparation. The people who struggle most in the transition to full retirement are the ones who arrive at it having never practiced rest, never practiced building a day around meaning rather than schedule. A 6-month break in your mid to late 50s is not an interruption of your career. It is training for the last and most important chapter of your life. The financial framework in 5 steps. Calculate your actual monthly costs. Build a separate micro-retirement fund, $20,000 to $36,000 for 6 months. Account for health insurance. Plan your re-entry before you leave. And check your SSA earnings record. If you have 35 or more high-earning years, a year off may cost you nothing in Social Security benefits. Sandra came back better. The ceramics class gave her a creative outlet she still has. She now knows her retirement date. She told me it was the first decision about her future that she made from clarity rather than fear. That is what a micro-retirement can give you, not just rest, clarity. Here is the question I want to leave you with. If you could take 6 months with financial planning, with intention, with a return plan, what would you do with them? Not a fantasy answer, a real one. Where would you go? What would you finally have time to find out about yourself? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and I think the answers in this comment section are going to be some of the most honest conversations that happen on this channel, because this is a question most people have never looked themselves actually answer. If this video reached someone you know who is running hard right now and has never stopped long enough to ask whether the direction is right, share it with them. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.